The alarms pierced through the sterile silence of Mercy General Hospital at exactly 3:47 p.m., their shrieking wail cutting through conversations, interrupting procedures, freezing every soul within the whitewashed corridors. Doctor, Sarah Chen looked up from the IV line she was adjusting for 8-year-old Tommy Martinez, her hands steady, despite the chaos erupting around them. The boy's fever had finally broken after 3 days of careful treatment, his small chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm she had worked so hard to restore. Code Silver. Code Silver. All personnel remain in position. Security lockdown initiated. The announcement crackled through the intercom system, each word dropping like stones into still water, sending ripples of confusion and fear throughout the pediatric ward. Sarah had never heard a Code Silver before. In her 8 years at Mercy General, she had navigated Code Blues, Code Reds, even the occasional Code Gray for a combative patient. But Code Silver meant something different entirely. Something that made her stomach clench with an undefined dread as she watched uniformed officers flood through the double doors, their boots echoing against the polished linoleum with military precision. "Ma'am, step away from the patient," commanded Officer Rodriguez, his hand resting on his radio as he approached Sarah's station. His voice carried the weight of authority, but she caught something else beneath it: uncertainty, perhaps even sympathy. "We need to secure this area immediately." Sarah's mind raced as she glanced toward Tommy's mother, Maria Martinez, who had been keeping vigil beside her son's bed for days. The woman's face had drained of color, her weathered hands gripping the plastic chair arms until her knuckles turned white. "What's happening? What's wrong with my baby?" Maria's voice cracked, the words tumbling out in a mixture of English and Spanish, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "There's been a report of potential poisoning," Officer Rodriguez explained, his tone carefully measured. "We need to investigate all recent medical interactions. No one leaves this floor until we sort this out." The word poisoning hung in the air like smoke from a fire, visible and suffocating. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, her professional composure warring with a growing sense of panic. She looked down at Tommy, at the IV line she had just checked, at the medication chart she had meticulously maintained. Every calculation had been precise, every dosage carefully measured according to his weight, his condition, his specific needs. Down the hallway, she could see her colleague Jennifer Walsh in animated discussion with another officer, her blonde hair catching the harsh fluorescent light as she gestured toward the nurse's station. Jennifer had been on duty when Sarah arrived for her shift, and they had completed the standard handoff protocol without incident. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that would warrant this level of response. "Officer, I need to check on my other patients," Sarah said, moving toward the door of Tommy's room. "Mrs. Patterson in 312 needs her medication in 20 minutes, and the baby in 315. "Ma'am, I said no one leaves," Rodriguez repeated, this time with more firmness. "That includes medical staff. We're waiting for the detectives." Detectives. The word sent ice through Sarah's veins. This wasn't a medical emergency or a hospital protocol issue. Someone had made a criminal accusation, and the machinery of law enforcement was already grinding into motion around her. The morning had begun like any other Tuesday in the pediatric wing. Sarah had arrived at 7 a.m., her thermos of green tea still warm, her mind already focused on her patient's needs. She had reviewed charts, administered medications, comforted worried families, and coordinated with physicians the routine symphony of healing that she had performed thousands of times before. Her patients ranged from newborns with respiratory issues to teenagers recovering from appendectomies, each requiring different skills, different approaches, different kinds of compassion. She loved her work with an intensity that sometimes surprised her friends and family. Her parents, immigrants from Taiwan, who had sacrificed everything for their children's education, had hoped she would become a physician. But Sarah had discovered early in nursing school that her calling lay in the day-to-day care, the bedside conversations, the small victories that happened between doctor visits. She specialized in pediatric care because children healed with such remarkable resilience when given proper attention and love. Today's patients had been particularly challenging. In addition to Tommy Martinez, whose pneumonia had required careful monitoring, she was caring for Emma Patterson, a 6-year-old with severe allergies who needed specialized treatments, and baby Marcus Thompson, born premature and still struggling with feeding issues. Each case demanded precision, empathy, and unwavering attention to detail. The accusation had come from Margaret Hoffman, a woman in her 50s who had been visiting her sister-in-law in the adjacent medical wing. Sarah barely knew Mrs. Hoffman beyond their brief encounters in the elevator and hallways. She was the type of person who complained loudly about wait times, questioned every procedure, and seemed perpetually dissatisfied with the level of service she expected to receive. "I saw her putting something in the IV bags," Margaret had told the 911 operator, her voice sharp with manufactured certainty. "That Asian nurse, the one with the long black hair, she was acting suspicious, looking around like she didn't want anyone to see. When I asked her what she was doing, she couldn't give me a straight answer. I think she's poisoning the patients." The operator had followed protocol, dispatching emergency services and alerting hospital security. Within minutes, Mercy General had transformed from a place of healing into something resembling a crime scene, with yellow tape, uniformed officers, and an atmosphere of suspicion that seemed to contaminate everything it touched. Detective Lisa Morrison arrived 45 minutes after the initial call, her practiced eye taking in the scene with professional detachment. She had handled numerous hospital investigations over her 15-year career, from theft cases to more serious allegations. This one felt different from the moment she stepped onto the pediatric floor and saw the fear in both patients' and families' eyes. "Where's the nurse in question?" she asked Officer Rodriguez, pulling out her notepad. "Room 308 with the Martinez boy. She's been cooperative, but we haven't questioned her yet." Detective Morrison nodded, then made her way to the nurses' station where Margaret Hoffman waited with barely contained agitation. The woman was pacing between the chairs in the family waiting area, her designer purse clutched tightly against her chest, her makeup slightly smudged from what appeared to be tears of distress. "Mrs. Hoffman, I'm Detective Morrison. Can you walk me through exactly what you witnessed?" Margaret's account was detailed and delivered with unwavering conviction. She described seeing Sarah at the medication preparation area, allegedly tampering with IV solutions, behaving suspiciously when questioned, and exhibiting what she characterized as guilty body language. She emphasized Sarah's ethnicity multiple times, suggesting it was somehow relevant to her potential for wrongdoing. "These people, they come here with their own agendas," Margaret said, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidential truth. "My neighbor works in hospital administration, and she says there have been concerns about foreign medical staff, cultural differences in how they view patient care, if you know what I mean." Detective Morrison maintained her neutral expression while making notes, but she recognized the coded language Margaret was using. Years of investigating cases involving bias and discrimination had taught her to listen, not just to what witnesses said, but to what their words revealed about their motivations and prejudices. Meanwhile, the lockdown continued with devastating efficiency. Patients who needed medication remained unmedicated. Scheduled procedures were postponed. Families arriving for visits were turned away at the hospital entrance, left to wonder and worry about their loved ones inside. The normal rhythm of healing and care had been replaced by the harsh cadence of investigation and suspicion. In room 315, baby Marcus Thompson began showing signs of distress. His feeding tube had become dislodged, and his oxygen saturation levels were dropping. His mother, Diane Thompson, pressed the call button repeatedly, but no nursing staff responded. The officers stationed outside each room had been instructed to maintain the lockdown at all costs, which meant medical care had become secondary to criminal investigation. "Please, someone help my baby." Diane's voice carried down the hallway, rising to a pitch that cut through the institutional calm. "He's turning blue. Something's wrong." Sarah heard the commotion from Tommy's room and moved toward the door, her medical training overriding every other consideration. "That's Marcus Thompson. He's premature. He needs immediate attention. Let me help him." "You're not going anywhere," Officer Rodriguez said firmly. "We're waiting for the medical examiner to clear the medications and equipment." "That baby could die while you're waiting." Sarah's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the fierce protectiveness that had driven her to become a pediatric nurse. "At least get Dr. Patterson from the ER. Get someone who isn't under suspicion." The next 20 minutes unfolded with agonizing slowness. Dr. Patterson arrived from the emergency department, but had to work without his usual nursing support, struggling with equipment and procedures he hadn't handled directly in years. The specialized knowledge that Sarah possessed about Marcus's specific needs, his feeding schedule, his medication requirements, remained locked away behind the wall of suspicion that surrounded her. Baby Marcus Thompson died at 4:23 p.m., 36 minutes after the lockdown began. The official cause would later be listed as complications from premature birth, but everyone present knew that prompt nursing intervention might have saved him. His death certificate would become evidence in multiple lawsuits, and his short life would serve as a tragic reminder of the cost of fear-driven decisions. Diane Thompson's screams echoed through the pediatric ward long after her son had been taken away, a sound that would haunt the dreams of everyone who heard it. She collapsed against her husband, James, both of them destroyed by a loss that felt both inevitable and entirely preventable. "This is your fault," James Thompson said to Detective Morrison, his voice hollow with grief. "My son died because you believed some racist woman's lies instead of trusting the nurse who had been keeping him alive." The detective had no response. She had followed protocol, acted on a credible report, taken necessary precautions, but protocols and precautions offered little comfort in the face of a preventable death. As news of the baby's death spread through the hospital, the mood shifted dramatically. Staff members who had initially supported the investigation began questioning its basis and methods. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the chief of pediatrics, demanded immediate access to all medical records and medication logs to conduct her own review. What she found within hours of beginning her investigation would ultimately exonerate Sarah completely and expose the tragic flaws in the response to Margaret Hoffman's accusations. Every medication administered under Sarah's care had been precisely documented, properly dosed, and correctly delivered. The IV preparations that Margaret claimed to have witnessed being tampered with showed no signs of contamination or foreign substances. Independent laboratory analysis of blood samples from Sarah's patients revealed nothing unusual, nothing harmful, nothing that deviated from standard medical treatment. More damning still were the security camera recordings from the medication preparation area. The hospital's surveillance system, installed the previous year as part of a quality improvement initiative, had captured every moment of Sarah's interactions with medical supplies and patient care. The footage showed a dedicated nurse following proper protocols, preparing medications with meticulous care, and responding appropriately to patient needs. There was no evidence of tampering, no suspicious behavior, no indication of anything other than competent medical care delivered with professional precision. What the cameras did capture, however, was Margaret Hoffman watching Sarah from a distance, taking notes on her phone, and making what appeared to be a recording of Sarah's activities. She was building a case, Dr. Harper told Detective Morrison during their meeting the following morning. Mrs. Hoffman wasn't reporting what she witnessed in real time. She was documenting what she wanted to present as evidence later. The revelation transformed the investigation entirely. Margaret Hoffman's motivations came under scrutiny, and her history of complaints against minority staff members at various institutions became part of the official record. Phone records showed that she had researched hospital poisoning cases online before making her 911 call, suggesting premeditation rather than spontaneous concern. Most revealing of all were the witness statements from other hospital visitors and staff members who had observed Margaret's behavior in the weeks leading up to her accusation. Several people reported hearing her make explicitly racist comments about Asian medical professionals, expressing distrust of their competence and questioning their presence in American hospitals. She said she didn't want those people taking care of her family, testified Rebecca Martinez, a hospital volunteer who had worked with Margaret's sister-in-law. She specifically asked that no Asian nurses be assigned to the case. When the charge nurse explained that wasn't how staffing worked, Mrs. Hoffman became very angry. Sarah's vindication came too late to save baby Marcus Thompson, too late to prevent the trauma inflicted on multiple families, too late to undo the damage caused by a false accusation rooted in racial prejudice. But it was complete and unequivocal, supported by medical evidence, surveillance footage, and witness testimony that painted a clear picture of what had actually occurred. The hospital held a press conference to announce the findings and publicly clear Sarah's name. Hospital Administrator Robert Chen stood at the podium, his face grave as he addressed the assembled media representatives and community members who had gathered to learn the truth about the incident that had shaken their trust in the medical institution. Nurse Sarah Chen is an exemplary medical professional who has served our patients and community with distinction for 8 years, he announced. The allegations made against her were entirely false and appear to have been motivated by racial prejudice rather than legitimate medical concerns. We deeply regret that our response to these allegations contributed to a preventable tragedy. The district attorney's office announced their intention to prosecute Margaret Hoffman for filing a false police report, inciting public panic, and contributing to the wrongful death of Marcus Thompson. The charges carried significant prison time and financial penalties, reflecting the severity of her actions and their consequences. Margaret's employer, a prestigious law firm where she had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years, terminated her employment immediately following the press conference. Her professional reputation, built over decades of work in the legal field, crumbled within days as news outlets picked up the story and social media amplified the details of her false accusation. The civil lawsuits began almost immediately. The Thompson family filed wrongful death claims against both Margaret Hoffman and the hospital system, seeking damages for the loss of their son and the suffering caused by the preventable tragedy. Sarah filed her own lawsuit for defamation, emotional distress, and damage to her professional reputation. But the legal consequences, however severe, could not restore what had been lost. Marcus Thompson would never take his first steps, never speak his first words, never experience the life that had been cut short by fear and prejudice masquerading as public safety. Sarah returned to work 3 weeks later, after completing a voluntary counseling program and receiving clearance from both the hospital administration and the state nursing board. Her colleagues welcomed her back with a combination of relief and solidarity. But she could see the changed dynamic in their interactions. Every medication she prepared was now watched more carefully, not out of suspicion, but out of protective awareness. Her fellow nurses had witnessed how quickly and completely a dedicated professional could be destroyed by false accusations. And they had all become more conscious of their vulnerability in an environment where fear could override facts. Tommy Martinez made a full recovery from his pneumonia and was discharged to his mother's grateful arms. Maria Martinez had remained at Sarah's bedside throughout the investigation, refusing to believe that the nurse who had cared so tenderly for her son could be capable of harm. Her unwavering support had provided crucial emotional strength during the darkest days of the ordeal. "Nurse Sarah saved my boy's life," Maria told reporters outside the hospital. "She stayed with us when his fever was highest. She held my hand when I was scared. She treated Tommy like he was her own child. That woman who lied about her should be ashamed." Emma Patterson, the 6-year-old with severe allergies, had also recovered fully under Sarah's continued care. Her parents had written letters to hospital administration praising Sarah's competence and compassion, adding their voices to the growing chorus of support from families whose lives had been touched by her dedication. The community response evolved from initial shock and suspicion to outrage and advocacy. Asian American medical professionals throughout the region had experienced increased scrutiny and discrimination in the wake of Margaret's false accusations, prompting community organizations to organize rallies and educational events focused on combating healthcare-related racism. Dr. James Liu, president of the local Asian American Medical Association, addressed one such gathering with words that resonated far beyond the hospital walls. "What happened to Nurse Chen could happen to any of us who dedicate our lives to healing others. We cannot allow fear and prejudice to corrupt the sacred trust between patients and caregivers." The hospital implemented new protocols in response to the incident, including mandatory bias training for all staff members, revised procedures for responding to suspicious activity reports, and enhanced support systems for employees facing discrimination or false accusations. The changes were meaningful, but felt insufficient to address the deeper societal issues that had enabled Margaret's actions to cause such devastating harm. Margaret Hoffman's trial became a focal point for discussions about accountability, prejudice, and the real-world consequences of racial bias. Her defense team argued that she had acted in good faith, based on genuine concerns about patient safety. But the evidence of premeditation and racial motivation proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Margaret was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution to the Thompson family and Sarah Chen. Her public apology, read by her attorney in the courthouse hallway, felt hollow to those who had witnessed the destruction caused by her actions. "I deeply regret the pain and suffering my mistaken accusations have caused," the statement read. "I acted on concerns that I now understand were based on my own biases rather than legitimate observations. I ask for forgiveness from the families affected by my actions." Sarah was present in the courtroom for the sentencing, accompanied by colleagues and community supporters who had stood with her throughout the ordeal. She felt no satisfaction in seeing Margaret led away in handcuffs, only a profound sadness for all the lives that had been irreparably changed by prejudice and fear. In the months that followed, Sarah became an inadvertent advocate for healthcare professionals facing discrimination and false accusations. She spoke at conferences, participated in diversity training programs, and shared her story with medical students learning about the ethical complexities of modern healthcare. "We enter this profession to heal and help," she told a gathering of nursing students at the State University. "But we must also be prepared to defend our integrity and protect our patients from forces that have nothing to do with medicine." Discrimination and bias can be just as deadly as any disease. The pediatric ward at Mercy General gradually returned to its normal rhythm. But the memory of that terrible Tuesday afternoon remained embedded in its institutional consciousness. New nurses arriving for their first shifts heard the story during orientation, learning not just about proper medical procedures, but about the importance of vigilance against prejudice and the courage required to stand with colleagues facing unjust accusations. Tommy Martinez, now completely healthy, returned for regular checkups with Sarah whenever possible. Maria Martinez had requested specifically that her family be assigned to Sarah's care for any future medical needs, a gesture of trust and gratitude that meant more to Sarah than any official recognition or award. The legal settlements provided financial compensation, but could never restore what had been lost. The Thompson family used their settlement to establish a foundation focused on improving pediatric emergency protocols and ensuring that patient care never again be sacrificed to unfounded fears and accusations. Baby Marcus Thompson's name was engraved on a memorial plaque in the hospital's pediatric wing, a reminder of the innocent life lost to prejudice and the ongoing responsibility to protect vulnerable patients from forces beyond their understanding or control. Sarah continued her work with renewed purpose, her experience having deepened her understanding of both the healing power of medicine and the destructive potential of unchecked bias. She maintained her specialization in pediatric care, finding strength in the trust of young patients who saw her only as someone dedicated to making them feel better. Years later, when asked about the incident and its aftermath, Sarah would reflect on the complex lessons learned from such a tragic experience. The false accusation had revealed the fragility of professional reputation and the speed with which fear could override rational judgment. But it had also demonstrated the power of truth, the importance of community support, and the resilience of institutions committed to justice and healing. The story of that day at Mercy General Hospital became part of the ongoing national conversation about racial bias in healthcare, cited in academic papers, legal briefs, and policy discussions about protecting both patients and providers from discrimination-based harm. It served as a cautionary tale about the real-world consequences of prejudice and the importance of evidence-based decision-making in crisis situations. Most importantly, it reminded everyone involved that behind every uniform, every professional title, every medical procedure, were human beings deserving of respect, fairness, and the presumption of competence regardless of their ethnicity or country of origin. The price of forgetting that lesson had been measured in a young life lost, and countless others forever changed by the corrosive effects of hatred masquerading as concern. As Sarah finished her shift on a quiet evening months later, checking on sleeping patients one final time before heading home, she carried with her both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose that defined her calling. The corridor lights dimmed automatically as she walked toward the elevator, her soft footsteps echoing in the peaceful stillness that had been restored to the pediatric ward. In the distance, she could hear the gentle sounds of healing, the steady beep of monitors tracking recovering patients, the whispered conversations of night shift nurses coordinating care, the occasional cry of a newborn taking his first breaths in the world. These were the sounds that had drawn her to nursing, the rhythm of life continuing despite the challenges and tragedies that sometimes tested everyone's faith in the power of human compassion. The emergency call that had changed everything served ultimately as a reminder that healing required not just medical skill, but moral courage, not just professional competence, but personal integrity, not just individual dedication, but community support. In the end, truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and the work of caring for the vulnerable continued with renewed commitment to the values that made such work both possible and meaningful. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead as Sarah made her final notes in patient charts. Each entry a small act of professional responsibility that connected her to the larger purpose of healthcare. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to demonstrate that compassion and competence knew no boundaries of race, ethnicity, or national origin. She gathered her belongings and headed for the parking garage, her steps confident and purposeful despite everything she had endured. The city lights sparkled beyond the hospital windows, and somewhere in the distance, other healthcare workers were beginning their night shifts, continuing the endless cycle of care that defined their shared mission. The story would continue to unfold in courtrooms and classrooms, in policy discussions and personal conversations, in the daily interactions between healthcare providers and the patients who trusted them with their most precious gift, their lives and the lives of those they loved. But for Sarah Chen, the story had already found its resolution in the simple act of returning to work, of caring for others, of refusing to let fear and prejudice define either her purpose or her patient's care. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that life could take, the unexpected ways that individual actions could ripple through communities and change countless lives. Margaret Hoffman's false accusation had caused immeasurable harm, but it had also revealed the strength of institutional systems when they functioned properly, the power of evidence to overcome bias, and the resilience of communities committed to justice and truth. The emergency call that had shattered so many lives had ultimately become a catalyst for positive change, strengthening protocols, raising awareness, and bringing together people who might otherwise have remained strangers in their commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. It was a painful lesson, purchased at too high a price, but one that would continue to protect others long after the immediate participants had moved on with their lives. Sarah pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment in the darkness, feeling the weight of the day settle around her shoulders like a familiar coat. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate that healing was still possible in a world that sometimes seemed determined to tear itself apart with suspicion and fear. She had survived the false accusation, the investigation, the trial, and all the painful aftermath that had followed. More importantly, she had maintained her commitment to the work that defined her, the calling that had brought her to healthcare in the first place. The emergency call that had threatened to destroy everything had instead strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of why her work mattered so much. Inside her small apartment, Sarah made tea and reviewed her schedule for the following day. New patients would arrive. Existing patients would continue their recovery. Families would look to her for guidance and reassurance. The rhythm of care would continue, protected now by harder-won wisdom and supported by a community that had learned the true cost of allowing prejudice to masquerade as legitimate concern. The phone rang softly in the darkness, and Sarah smiled as she recognized Maria Martinez's voice on the other end. Tommy was doing wonderfully, his mother reported, growing stronger every day and asking when he could visit Nurse Sarah again. It was exactly the kind of call that reminded Sarah why she had become a nurse and why she would continue to be one, regardless of the challenges and risks that came with the territory. The emergency call that had changed everything had ultimately failed to change the most important thing of all: her unwavering commitment to healing others and her unshakable belief that compassionate care was the most powerful force for good in a world that desperately needed both healing and hope.